Sorry, cartridge fans, brass and projectiles are off the table. Today we sharpen our focus on hunting knives. Hunting knives. Covey, do you like hunting knives?
Yeah, I like hunting knives because I get me pieces of meat to eat.
Covey's bothering me, so we figured we better bring her in or she would be yiping and begging me to take her out running. While we talk about knives, yeah, she likes the smell of some of these knives, and I think I know why. They've been in some interesting places. Speaking of interesting knives, I think most of us have a story about a hunting knife. I don't know what it is about knives, but they're like rifles in a lot of ways because they are tools which we use for our adventures. So even when we're not using them, just seeing one reminds us of so many memories and or dreams of what we might do in the future. And this knife represents that to me. My brother gave me this knife when I was probably 19, 20 years old. Just getting started in my hunting career. I think by then I had probably been hunting big game for 4 or 5 years at the most. And I was using some kind of a cheap knife. And my brother got a real job and was making enough money that he thought he'd splurge and get his brother a real hunting knife, a buck knife. And at the time, I thought this was the coolest knife ever. And today, it's probably not my favorite. It's a little bit longer than I think I really need, but boy, I still like to take it out, handle it, and every once in a while use it because it brings back all those memories. So a big part of knife appreciation, I think, are those memories. And as I said earlier, the dreams that a knife can bring, especially a sheath knife. I think most of us start off hunting, we want a sheath knife. And don't get confused about a sheath knife being a fixed-handled knife versus a sheath that holds a folding knife. These are your two basic knife types, the ones that fold out of the way so the blade is hidden and they're a little bit safer. You're not going to accidentally cut through the sheath and stab yourself or cut something. But the sheath knives are handier if you need to use a knife quickly. You just pull it out. But I don't know, when I was a kid hunting, I just needed a sheath knife. You just weren't a hunter until you had a big knife on your belt, right? You had your ammo clip on your belt and you had your knife on your belt and your rifle over your shoulder and you were a hunter. And it still works that way, but I have pretty much come to prefer the folding knives just because they're so compact and safe. But I think what we want to discuss today are the types of knives that we might want to consider for hunting. In my experience, I think one only needs 2 knives in the field, and you could get by with 1. But 3 is probably better for the complete process of turning your game into meat ready for the dinner table. So let's talk about some basic knife types, and then we'll narrow it down to what I think works really well. And Covey, you can throw your opinions in here whenever you'd like, but I know the knife you like is the one I'm using to cut off little pieces of meat to put over the fire. Oh, that one? Is that what you picked? Okay, this is Covey's favorite knife. There's nothing in it right now, Cov. Good selection though anyway. What you picked is I believe it's a Puma with a stag horn handle. That's pretty nice. Look at that guy. Brass, staghorn, genuine staghorn. Covers. Oh man, that is a nice knife. I don't like the blade style too. It is a Puma and a stag handle. I like that. Made in Germany. They've got good steel there. Hey, that's a good place to start. Speaking of steel, you want to get good quality steel in your knife. Here's what you're up against. Carbon content. Carbon makes it harder so it holds an edge better, but then it's a little more difficult to sharpen. So you've got to strike a balance. Not too hard, but not too soft that it gets dull in a hurry. I have found that, like this buck knife that my brother got me, took a long time to sharpen. Of course, back in those days, I wasn't the most adept knife sharpener. I learned over the years to be a little more effective at that. But boy, you had to put some work into getting that knife sharp. Once you did, it stayed sharp pretty darn long because of the high carbon content. So I'm not going to go into exactly what the mixtures are. You can do a little more research on that. We're going to talk about styles. So first of all, decide if you do want the sheath knife with the fixed blade You never have to fold it or anything, or go with the folding type. Either one works. It's the blade itself and the feel and balance of the handle and how it all functions. And I noticed when I was going through part of my collection here that some of them had some really useful features. Where was that one? Was this it? Yeah, this is a good one right here. If we can get some close-ups of this. This is a kind of a giveaway knife for joining the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. And I think you might be able to see it on there. And what this knife does, or really what it's for, is caping. It's a short little blade, and it's great for going around antlers and narrow little spots to do some caping work. It can work pretty well on small game too. I think I've got a little bit of dried up fat from a caping operation in the handle here. But what I like about it are these serrations in important places on the knife, like this little part right here up front where it's serrated. Well, if you're working in really close and tight with just the tip of the knife, you put your finger there and you don't slip off. If you're doing a little more gross work, you put your thumb on it there or your finger there and control it that way. But it makes sense to have that. There's even a little bit here on the back that'll improve your grip on the handle and underneath. So that's practical stuff for keeping your knife controllable when your hands get wet and slippery. Useful feature you might want to look for on different knives. Let's see what this one has. So many else around here. You know, this one's got some right on the back too, pretty much in the same place. This is a Boker knife, and it was emblazoned by Blaser Firearms out of Germany. They're using some really good quality steel on this. Full bolster. When they say full bolster, what you're seeing is the slab of steel goes all the way from the heel to the tip, and then they just put the wood or stag handle or whatever the sides are onto that. That knife's not going to break. If you get a knife that just has a little piece of steel jutting back into the handle, those are the ones that can easily break or come apart. So something worth looking at. But notice the blade style on this one and how similar it is to some of the others I have here. Pretty close to the same basic style and length. And what I want to point out on that, the difference between a clip blade and a drop point. I like the drop point because this clip blade, to me, it comes up to such a sharp point that I find that I poke it where I don't want to poke it, through the hide or into the intestines, and then I've got a problem. So I've never liked that really sharp tip, other than for in these little caping knives like this. Then I find it works really well. And this one, as again, you can see a little bit of a serration right here, so I can really get in around the eyes and up against the base of the antlers and work that knife. So that is a good feature that I think is worth having. But in a general purpose knife with a bigger blade like this one, I just don't prefer it because it's too easy to poke things out. Now, this is a big case knife and it's fairly heavy. It's got a good feel to the handle. You want to get your balance to what feels comfortable to you. You don't want too much heavy out front balance. It tends to tire you out, but you don't want it too light in the front, too heavy in the back. You'll feel it. Once you start working with a knife, you'll figure things out. Now, here's the knife that I rarely use. In fact, this one's been so rarely used that it's getting a little bit rusty, I just noticed. Oh my goodness, that's embarrassing. But that big wide blade is good for basically skinning. But I don't like it with this sharper tip on it. For a skinning knife, I'd want it to round off at the tip. That way, when I'm coming down the hide like that, I don't poke it with that sharp tip. It just rounds off and you're less likely to cut through. So consider that in a skinning knife. I do just fine with a skinning blade that looks about like this. In fact, this right now is one of my favorite knives. I carry this a lot. Not only do I think it has just the right blade style and size for general purpose field dressing of deer and even elk and moose to a little bit lesser degree, one a little bit longer blade maybe for moose, but it's so lightweight. I don't know what this synthetic material is on the handle here, but this light knife is what I prefer for minimum weight when I'm working in the mountains. And the balance, I think, is just fine. It's got some little grooves here to keep your fingers in place so you're not as likely to slide off. Got a little rise right here so your thumb's got a little bit of purchase. I would prefer a little serration on here, but it's not bad. And these two pins sticking out to help you open the knife like this also serve to keep your finger from slipping off of it if you're working this way. So generally, I am going to be doing that a lot of fine work with a knife like that. But it's big enough that you can go around the anus to clear it so you can pull it all through when you're gutting your deer. And it's got enough of a belly in it that you can do a pretty good job of skinning. Got a little bit of a sharp tip on it, but it's pretty high up there on that drop point, so there's less chance that you're going to, you don't want me to use this skinny knife, do you? No. Little less chance that you're going to poke through a hide with that. So that's what I consider a general purpose knife. That is the one that I would consider my essential. Now, in a fixed blade knife, this one is more what I would call elk moose size. Not a huge difference, about another 3/4 of an inch to an inch of blade there, but notice the belly pretty much the same shape. And I back that up with my second essential knife, which is, again, the caping knife. So let's go to the caping knives now and look at a couple of options here, and you'll notice that they're all pretty darn similar. I thought I had one more here, but I think I don't. But this one comes awfully close, but these two really let you do the fine detail work. So these are pretty fancy diamond blade knives with some really, really sharp surface. These were tested to have the longest lasting edge of any blade tested, according to the company that makes them. And I found that they do hold their edge awfully, awfully well. And they're fairly easy to sharpen too, which kind of surprised me. I figured they would be a real bear to sharpen, but they sharpen up pretty darn quickly and then really hold that edge. But this is an example of a pretty pricey knife. If you really are into knives, you're going to want to look at something like this. But you certainly don't have to spend $500 to $1,000 on a fancy knife in order to have an effective hunting knife. You know, a little thing like this, I got this from the Mule Deer Foundation for joining up. And I just find that it's a wonderful knife that I use all the time. Buck makes it, same one that made my old knife my brother gave me here. I think they've changed up their steel composition because this one sharpens up really easily and it holds it wonderfully well and really works out for me in the long term. A similar blade here on a fixed blade knife, a little more belly in it. I don't feel that that belly is necessary. The width, I like the curve of it, but I don't think you need that much width. But if you like it and it feels good in your hand, it's not that big of a deal. As you can see, a lot of my knives are fairly similar that way. Some of them have cutouts. That's just to save weight. No big deal there. This is a really nice knife that stays wonderfully sharp for me too, but it's even a little bit lighter weight than this one. I just like the balance of this one a little bit better. It's a very subtle thing, but you'll get used to that. So once again, your basics, whether it's a fixed blade or a folder, these two, I think, pretty much cover the waterfront for you. You can gut, skin, cape pretty much any big game animal with two knives of about this size. And if you don't like this one that's quite that big, I think you can get by with this one until you get up into a moose size animal, which will be a little more challenging. And then you're going to go to a specialty hunting knife that most of us don't think of as hunting knives, but I think this is essential for the last step. And that is a fish fillet knife. For working the meat off of the bones, off of the carcass. Man, these things work so bloody well. I don't know how I came up with the idea to use these, but the flex in the blade makes it so nice to go around the bones when you're peeling the meat off of the leg bones and going down along the ribs and anywhere you're working meat to bone it. These work really, really well. Narrow little blade, so it's not getting in the way by being too wide, and it's flexible. Now this one has an unusual curve shape to it that a friend of mine designed, and he is a professional meat cutter, and he claims this one reduces stress in your hand position and your wrist while you're working meat, but that's during an 8-hour day of serious work. So I don't think that comes into play for someone who's just doing a deer or even a moose. I wouldn't say that's essential, but if you're doing a lot of cutting over a long period of time, that might help save some of the discomfort from having to work at weird angles that you might get from a flatter lying on a blade like this. But either way, having a couple of these to cut up your meat and peel off the silver skin when you're getting things finalized, and slicing very thinly for making jerky, for instance. Boy, a knife like this, good old fish fillet knife, is the way to go. So once again, caping knife, basic gutting field dressing knife, and then working in the kitchen to get that meat down to the final form with one of these. And I think you're done. Now, you can get real fussy and pick out a whole bunch of different options on your knives, but boy, for me, those really do the trick. So consider the balance, consider the shape of that blade, consider how you're using it. You don't want to be poking holes in the hide, poking holes in the intestines and that sort of stuff, so you don't need a sharp tip on it. And then it's got to be a good balance, something that fits your hand really well. Some of us have smaller hands, some of us have larger hands, so take that into consideration. When you're feeling that knife, pay attention to what your hand is telling you. Does it feel right to you? Does it feel like you can work with it? That's the knife you probably want. Oh guys, hey, I forgot one. This thing, replaceable blade knives. It's like a razor. You just get a dull blade, you throw it away, and you put another one on. A lot of guys really like these, and I have tried them in 2 sizes. This is a small, I've got a longer one. And I find that the longer one works a little bit like this because the blade is really thin and it's flexible. But I'm not real crazy about throwaways. It's just conservative me. You know, I love knives, and part of that is I love sharpening knives. Once you learn how to sharpen a knife, you've got your companion, and you sharpen him, and I don't know how to explain it, but you feel good about having sharpened your knife and prepared it for the next use. And throwing a blade away like this, just doesn't set well with me. They certainly are razor sharp, and they can do a really, really fine, easy job because they're so sharp. But I just don't get that same sense of satisfaction I get when I sharpen a knife and use it over and over again for years and years. I just don't like throwing them away. Plus, it's a little bit scary. Where do you put that blade so you don't end up cutting somebody? You know, I get the same feeling if I throw a razor away, which is, I don't use them anymore. I went electric of all things. Of course, we're solar powered here, so I can use electric all I want. But if you you don't feel comfortable sharpening your knife and you want something really sharp, this is certainly one you can consider. A lot of guys absolutely love them. They are sharp. That's pretty much my story on knives, guys. I imagine you have your favorites, and we'd love to hear about those. So if you have some really what you think are important points about knives that I didn't cover here, and you may have noticed something that I didn't, boy, write in and let us know, and we can cover that. Send us some pictures of your knives too, and we might throw those up and discuss them in some of our future videos. But yeah, hunting knives are an essential part of the hunt. And of course, they also serve double duty for various camp work, whether it's whittling a tent peg or making a repair or who knows what, cutting rope. Got to have a good knife or two. And don't be surprised if one of your more useful knives is something like this. This is a knife that spends time with me every day. I wear it on my hip almost all the time. I have completely field dressed deer with this knife, and even caribou, and partially elk. Not the greatest blade in the world, but it can get the job done. And it has a lot of other useful little parts to it that I really find helpful. And one of them is this silly little saw. Swiss Army knife, it's called the Huntsman. I highly recommend this thing for general carry and use as an outdoorsman because it has essential tools. I can saw through the legs of an elk with this. I've used them on caribou as well, and a little bit on moose, getting a little bit short for some of the bigger bones on a moose. But then you've got screwdrivers and can openers on here, and those come in useful for fixing things. And you can get little parts to put in, like on this corkscrew for your wine bottle. You can turn in this tiny little screw, and people say, what do you need that little screwdriver for? I can repair glasses, I can repair cameras, any tiny little thing you need a screwdriver for, there it is. It's always with me. And of course you have the essential toothpick. Can't get by without that. And by golly, a little tweezer, and I have used that a lot, even on Covey for pulling out little thorns. Remember that one, Covey? Yeah. Don't get into porcupines. No, I can't pull out all the porcupine quills with that little thing. So, yeah, check that out too. I think that's an essential knife. So that's my story on knives. If you guys have better ones, boy, we'd love to hear about it. Until next time, this is Ron Spomer. Hunt honest, slice straight. Right, Covey?